session that starts with will be from Deborah Whelan talking about the lessons learned from COVID-19 experience, thinking with the third eye. Deborah's from the School of Architecture and the Built Environment, so looking forward to hearing from your perspective what those lessons are. As mentioned, I'll give you a ring when the time is up, but I'll take no more of your time and hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. Whilst the idea of blended learning was certainly not a new concept at the time of the first lockdown in March 2020, it compelled a rapid change in the mindset of teaching and learning. At the same time, this provided a significant opportunity to make paradigm shifts in practice in the School of Architecture and the Built Environment, and at the same time expose singular flaws in teaching delivery, content, and approach. This paper will discuss the challenges of the author in dealing with a significant intangible of conveying the absolute abstract to colleagues, and at the same time allowing for the freedom of experimentation and significant personal growth. It will discuss the challenges, triumphs, and flexibility demonstrated by colleagues in the school, with best practice being almost unilaterally identified as a new and viable way forward. The paper will conclude by describing our triumphs and how these enable us to craft a viable and resilient future in teaching architecture in a changing world. On the 19th of February 2020, we convened a digital crit workshop in the Concept Suite, which I'm sure Siobhan probably remembers. It was during our second activity and Here Reading Week, which we have found is a fabulous way of giving staff and students a breather, but also allowing for opportunities for capacity and team building. This session did not at all foresee that within 6 weeks we would be compelled to teach online. This session was not well attended. Many colleagues cried off, saying that they had urgent issues to attend to, and most of those that attended did so quite grudgingly and with great skepticism. My position on running this was to allow for a greater engagement of the digital in teaching, to support active feedback and feed-forward sessions with, I suppose, a subtle rider that there would be much less in the way of paper in studio cleanup over summer. I was keenly aware of the printing costs that students paid for in their sexy plotted posters, was well aware of the technical glitches that added to student pin-up routines, and was keen to introduce more in the way of digital pin-ups. A technique that we'd been employing at my previous university since around 2014, purely because the cost of plotting was so exorbitant for both the school and the students. Doing architecture as a profession is very visual, and so particularly in the School of Architecture and the Built Environment, in which presentation boards tell a narrative of the design development using rich iconography and complex imported visuals. The most important thing about this session was the moment when a particular colleague raised their pen and said dramatically, "This is all I need as an architect," thereby effectively scuttling the session and putting much discussion of digital engagement to an early grave. I was on research leave from the 29th of February, and whilst digitally connected, I only arrived back in the UK a year ago today on the 24th of March, when lockdown had well and truly started. Whilst I missed out on the curried departure of colleagues and students from the school, and yes, the studios did look a bit like the decks of the Marie Celeste in June when we went in to clean up, I came back into a totally digital world. As Director of Teaching and Learning, I was the person responsible for coordinating much of the detail needed to get the students through to the end of the year. Standardizing submission processes, putting together the bones of a digital festival of creativity, in which, to my recollection, we had not really participated in at all before. And we even played with the other schools in compelling students to select elements of their work for submission to the Creative Showcase as part of their submission requirements. Another way that we began to play with others, which is not necessarily historical in the school. Students suddenly articulated that the digital crit sessions recorded on Teams were brilliant because they could watch themselves back and learn, and here I facepalm, and then even better, they were able to watch the other students present their work and see what they had done, which is even a bigger facepalm, as this is the whole point of studio. But the point here is that the whole purpose of studios is that the collegial process of iterative teaching and learning through observation and watching others is key in the learning architecture process. And whilst we may have spaces and studios in which this is supposed to happen, in the real world, students work on laptops and not drawing boards, thus isolating themselves, and more so when they spend design review time scrolling through their Twitter accounts. However, we muddled through with a reasonable amount of student silence, which was good, collegial muttering, which was also good, and a glitch here and there. Luckily, we had submitted timetabling requests which supported the way we could teach online and allow for the agile and reflexive learning which was required by the university. This has meant that we've had to change little through this academic year and managed to create a significant space, and here I'm talking about a headspace, in which we had the ability to work directly with the students in closer communication rather than being dictated to by the needs of timetabling. This also gave us flexibility and allowed for responses which were timely and necessary rather than trying to anticipate everything up front. Fundamentally, this headspace allowed us to make changes in line with the agility, to test the real need for physical space, to test the real purpose of pedagogic practice, and much of which, whilst very good, is outdated and not necessarily relevant. It allowed for discussions as to what students need, how students learn, and what students consider as being their priorities, which is important in understanding our trajectory as a school. One major shift we made, driven by the needs for social distancing and capacity in rooms, is the way in which studios, previously allocated as undergrad and postgrad, were used. Whilst colleagues continued to be inarticulate about studio both as a noun and a verb, which it very much is in architecture, we transformed the fourth floor of Nicola de la Haye building into 6 teaching bays with socially distanced workspaces around a large digital screen. Colleagues detracted, saying that this is not suitable for studio teaching, but also being unable to offer alternative solutions in light of the standard operating procedures offered by the university. The third floor studios, which had previously become occupied by a rather desultory handful of mastered students, now became general workrooms for students across the school, including those from construction science and management and architectural science and technology, which previously did not really have a real opportunity for place. These spaces offer PCs, spaces for laptops and model making stuff, all within quite a nice, I hesitate to say, professional space. We campaigned heavily for this to be made available to students, particularly those who'd spent winter in Lincoln. And although this has only until now been used by a handful of students, it is significant that that handful who are using it are those who would generally have been resident, and that's almost physically permanently resident for many in studio. And it seems in the last few weeks that the compulsion for lateral flow tests allowing for face-to-face teaching will actually increase the uptake and use of these spaces so that they actually become multi-dimensional and multi-level, non-hierarchical student spaces. The challenge for the school is outlined in the little ethnographic clip above. Many colleagues were reticent to engage with multiple forms of real digital engagement, and those that were highly critical of it. The fact that we almost seamlessly moved into a digital realm is testimony to the incredible flexibility and adaptability of colleagues in the school. And for that, I'm incredibly proud of us as a team. At the same time, my summer was taken up thinking with the third eye, trying to see round corners and in a digital space in order that I'd be able to convey this thinking or sort of schematic scenario to colleagues in our timetabled work weeks over summer. However, I realized that being able to come up with a singular solution, which was digestible by all members of the teaching team with my third eye, was totally contrary to the perceptions and thinking of colleagues. And all I was able to do was force myself to step back and allow them the freedom of cognitive processes in order to get the job done. Thus, for me, the maturity to step back was important, giving colleagues the confidence and the framework to work out their own particular way of doing things, but also to not micromanage and allow for a middle ground between the dictates of college and the adapt and enable process and what was needed to happen on the ground. COVID has taught us much. It has taught us the holes in the curricula, debunked assumptions of what and how students think and learn, and how our reliance on physical and notional space has finally moved to a digitally based realm, nearly 35 years after the introduction of CAD as an architectural tool. To summarize, the effect that this will have on the future of blended learning is online reviews enabled students to review their feedback and feed forward and encourage them to engage critically with presentations. The engagement with the Festival of Creativity was something we will carry on. And the interactive whiteboard and collaborate for venting student frustrations was fantastic. What was not so lekker, to coin a real South African term, was fried brains. The assumption that students would seamlessly just hang out digitally was erroneous. Some students thrived and others battled, and it would be useful to track these against past plans and different learning abilities for future deployment. Students' lack of engagement with any type of flipped learning, which really pushed our buttons. And that is my final slide as per prompt. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. That's really been fascinating. Any quick questions from the audience? I know this session's a bit back to back at the moment. But whilst you're perhaps thinking about that, given your expertise in your area, I'm just wondering, have you any reflections on how the physical space and the virtual space might best blend going forward, and thinking about the lessons you've learned from this around encouraging engagement and student connection? What lessons do you think we should take forward into the design of our physical spaces?
So, Andy, I think that what we've done is we've ended up with a real win, is allowing for students. So in a normal world, we probably would have had 35 students sitting in the 3rd floor studio and the 4th floor studio, working there as a studio practice overnight. And what we've done is we've created a non-hierarchical space for all students to use, instead of necessarily having these third sort of postgrad and undergrad separations, but also the separation between the different programs that we're running. I think that we'll probably be using the 4th floor studios in parallel, very much the same as we did this year. We are looking at doing 3 hours of the 6-hour contact time digitally next year, including the briefing lecture, and then being able to do 3 hours face-to-face as we've done this year. All of our feedback sessions will be online and digital, because I think that that's worked wonderfully. We may never ever have an external examiner coming back into the school again. I think with history, I teach history of architecture, which are generally big classes. Students are very happy for the lectures to be face-to-face, digital, and then the smaller breakaway groups we can put in between studio sessions and have those face-to-face. And I can literally hop between the different bays of the students in the studio groups. So I think that we've got a lot of new practice. CSM and AST, the Construction Science and Management and Architectural Science and Technology, I think managed a lot easier because it was much more pedagogically simple in terms of being didactic teaching and sort of feedback learning instead of learning by demonstration. So I think that we've made great strides this year, and as I said earlier, you know, I think it's been a very good exercise. We are recurriculating in order to be able to plug some of these gaps, but also to be able to realize that what has happened with COVID is actually a portal to an entirely new world of built environments.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And on that, I think that's a good point to finish. Thank you very much for your presentation this afternoon.